Hello everyone, and welcome to our basement fort. Did you ever build one of these things when you were a kid? I know that we used to do this all the time, and we would take over the entire living room. You know, the living room in our house was one of those places that nobody ever went. So we would take over the living room. We'd get the coffee tables and the card tables and the chairs and everything else that we could find and every blanket that we could find, and we would build these huge elaborate forts that we would move our pillows into, and lamps and special toys and everything. And we just had an awesome time playing in our fort. Well, not too long ago, our grandkids were over, and it was one of those really particularly nasty days, one of those days where you couldn't go outside, and so they said they wanted to do something inside, and so Papa built them a basement fort, and they loved it. We had a lot of fun with it, and you know, this week as I was looking at the fort, it got me to thinking once again about that article I've mentioned in the last couple of devotionals I've done. That article that was talking about how to be more contemplative and how to connect with God in the midst of all the craziness that we go through, all the stress we go through, all the busyness and just wildness of life that we experience. And on this particular part of the article, he brought up something that I really hadn't thought of before. He mentioned that for us as pastors, especially right now, and I know you've experienced it too in your work, but he says at one place in the article, he said, working as a pastor in the midst of the pandemic felt like living in a barren desert. I don't know, some of you may have felt that way too, that trying to do what you were used to doing in the midst of a pandemic was like being in a barren desert. But he goes on to say, he says, we have had to shift and improvise to test approaches to ministry that we've never imagined before, and we did this all the while pretending to be health experts. You know, I read that and I said, man, he nailed it. That was what a lot of what we've experienced was like. But then he goes on and he says this, but rather seeing it as a barren desert, what if you began to see it as a giant sandbox of opportunity and creativity? What if we understood this time that we're in as if it was a giant playground, a chance to let our creativity flow in ways we never would have ever tried or imagined before? And you know what? I thought about it. That's what we did. I mean, there are a lot of things that we did at the church during the pandemic that we never would have imagined before. I saw like the fellowship team decide if people can't come to us, we're going to go to them. I saw the way we outreached through our worship services and did these online devotionals as well as our worship. I mean, we started live streaming worship. Never would we ever imagine. We started adding visual elements and things into our worship service that we never would imagine before. What we did was we took this nasty, rotten experience and time and we turned it into a playground. Just like when you can't go out inside and play because it's so nasty, you find a way to, through your creativity, experience life in a different way. And you know what? I think sometimes we forget that. We forget that God has given us an amazing creative ability, and sometimes we just don't tap into it. God can take us into a real barren desert, an awful place, but still turn it into a beautiful garden, turn it into wonderful opportunities. And as I was reading this and thinking about it and remembering back on some of this, I remembered what one of my favorite verses has become during this time of pandemic. I actually have called it my pandemic passage, the book of Jeremiah. People that have heard me and hung around me during this pandemic are sick of me talking about Jeremiah. But you know what? It is a rich text. And during this time when Jeremiah has got to break the bad news to the people of Israel that they are going to live in exile, that this is the way it's going to be. It's going to be different. It's going to be strange. We're going to be a strange people living in a strange land. I mean, when he said that, it could have been very easy for people to just feel like, no, it's a time of barrenness. But listen to what he says, Jeremiah 29, verse 4. He says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build homes and live in them. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Take wives, have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." Do you hear that? I mean, again, that is such an awesome message, that in the midst of whatever trials we may experience, in the midst of feeling as if we are in a barren desert, in the midst of pandemic, in the midst of whatever struggle we're going through, God is providing for us an opportunity to use our creativity in ways that we never imagined, to turn those barren deserts into sandbox, to turn basements into forts of fun, to take where you are living and turn it into a playground of creativity that we perhaps never would have tried before. There is a lot of stuff that happened during this pandemic that I don't want to ever repeat. But there's a lot of other stuff that I hope we continue to use and utilize for the ministry that we've been given. Go find a fort to play in.